Good afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan, and welcome to the latest edition of the RCB Entertainment Show, where we look at cult classic TV series that have left their mark throughout the generations, from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, up into the noughties, and we look at particular franchises as well that are spread across multiple generations. We're delving into a sci-fi iconic series from the times of the times of James T. Kirk and the times of the whole Captain Picard and all the sort of Star Trek generations throughout the past in terms of the legendary franchise. And this week we're going to look at one particular element of that franchise. It was called Star Trek Enterprise. And one of the main actors of that sort of show, he played the Doctor in that show, was John Billingsley. He played the character Doctor Phlox. It was the Danubian. Dare I say that?
I didn't get that one right.
No, in terms of a Danubian sort
Denobulan.
Denobian.
Denobulan. You're dropping the L. Nobody could pronounce it.
Alien sort of. I couldn't wrap my L's around.
It's quite all right. It's quite all right.
John, an absolute pleasure for you. I was just looking there. September the 26th, 2001 was your first episode. 20 years has gone by now, John, since that you were on the sort of set. 20 years. We're now into the nearly November, so 20 years and roughly a month or so. Can you take? Does it almost feel like it's 2 decades now?
Oh, at my age, everything feels like it happened in another century. I feel like we shot that show in the 1890s. It's very strange. Yeah, hard to believe. Fortunately, the nice thing is, I get to see all the guys from the show periodically at conventions and events. So we've stayed in touch. And the way that you are a member of a family, sometimes you're not really quite as cognizant of the passage of time because you see some of those folks all the time. So sometimes it doesn't feel like 20 years ago. Sometimes it feels like yesterday.
And John, was there pressure on you coming into this sort of franchise in terms of there was previous sort of Star Trek Deep Space was before you, Star Trek Voyager was before you. So obviously you're coming out trying to create your own identity. There was a few different elements of the Star Trek. Was there a franchise already out there? Was there elements, well, this is going to be hard to get off to buy into that fan base straight away. Maybe people might take into it, might not take into it. Was it?
And in fact, they didn't take into it. We were the show that killed the franchise, or at least mortally wounded the franchise. So, however, I personally didn't feel any sense of culpability because I'm an actor, not a writer. So I had no fault of mine. There are lots of wonderful things about the show. I think Star Trek had. I won't say it had worn out its welcome, but I think it needed a break. One show after another for many, many years without really a breath. And by and large, a lot of the same folks at the helm for all those years. I think if Paramount had just given it a year off, we all would have been better off, in all candor. But we also were screwed a bit by the fact that we were on a network called UPN. This was well before the streaming era. And UPN was not really available in a lot of marketplaces. And a lot of cities were able to yank our show if they felt like it because UPN didn't really have the ability to tell them not to. So we had a spotty audience base right out of the gate.
And John, was that your sort of first delve into that sort of universe? Had you tried out in previous shows or previous Star Treks for guest appearance roles or gone up for leading parts and it wasn't to be?
Star Trek was my second series regular. I was also on a short-lived show called The Others, which was an NBC show that Steven Spielberg executive produced. Sort of, in a way, a little bit ahead of its time, I think. It was a show about Ghostbusters. And unfortunately, they put us on Saturday night, which is death in America. In fact, we were the last show ever, the last network show to ever air on a Saturday night before finally the networks gave up even trying. So that was my first exposure really to that universe in a consistent basis, in a way that fans could actually appreciate basis. But you know, I'm a character actor, so I've been on all sorts of different things down the years.
And John, you mentioned that in terms of being a character actor. When you went first in for the audition of Doctor sort of Phlox in terms of that sort of role, and maybe your talent agent said to you, "Listen, John, there's a particular role we're coming up. We think it might sort of suit you." Were you in touch with that sort of universe? Had you watched a bit of it? Were you, or was it a case where when you found out the audition, right, I'm going to do my research into this, I'm going to see what type of characters they're portraying in previous sort of shows and try and bring my own twist, or are you very much in the mindset, right, I'm just going to go in and do my own thing?
Well, one, they don't give you a lot of material.
Okay.
Two, you're auditioning all the time as a television actor if you're of a certain age and you're marketable. So it was just another audition. I will say that I had the sides, but not the full script. I certainly was cognizant of the history of Star Trek. It wasn't as if I was unaware of the franchise. I'd watched the original show and some of its gen. Basically, all they said was come in with a slight alien accent. I had a scene in which the character obviously was fairly buoyant and optimistic. And the only thing that I did that did not make it into the final version that you saw on television was I envisioned that perhaps he was a bit of a bird on his planet. I thought, well, maybe it's an ornithological opportunity for me. So I squawked. And when I auditioned, I actually, in moments of joyous transport, I said, blah, 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 blah. That got cut. It became apparent to me when I went into the makeup chair after I got the part and nobody was fitting me with any kind of a beak and I had no feathers, that I was not conceived to be a bird. Beyond that, you auditioned, they liked me. It was actually, as these things go, a relatively effortless process. Sometimes when you're being cast for a series regular, they make you jump through many, many, many hoops. You audition again and again for the producers, and you audition for network and studios, sometimes multiple times. This was pretty painless as it goes. And, one of those rare instances where there isn't any competition. I was their choice.
And John, in terms of, you mentioned that in terms of the material to work with in that audition, had you any sort of sketch character sort of drawings, pictures, animations to work with to give you a sort of a hint or an inkling?
Nope. Nothing. And there'd never been a Denobulan before, so it wasn't as if you go in and audition for a Klingon or a Vulcan, you can do that research. But this was a brand new alien species, and they did say that they've never seen a Denobulan before. So there wasn't really anything to hang your hat on. And again, they didn't give me the pilot script.
Okay.
So, which you usually get. You usually get the full script. So really, it was just the one scene that I had to audition for. Although generally speaking, I think for actors, it's usually there on the page. It's more about what is the scene asking you to do? What is the action? What is the intention? How do you pack it so that you have some emotional commitment to the material? I don't tend to think that for the audition, especially, that it's a function of research so much as it is making sure you understand what the scene is asking you to do.
And was Scott Bakula already sort of cast in his role before you were cast? Was Scott?
I don't know. That's you really know very little as an actor in the audition process, unless it's late in the game and the trades, the Hollywood Reporter and Variety, have already announced so and so and so and so and so and so headlining such and such a show, and you're going into audition for one of the supporting leads. In this instance, I don't think there had been any press at all about Enterprise, so no, I didn't know who was attached.
Okay.
My memory is that Scott had not signed his deal yet.
Okay. And I remember in terms of doing my research for this, at times there during the show, they brought Jonathan Frakes in and they brought Brent Spiner in terms of in terms of I suppose to feel that sort of connection between the shows almost, and try and time link and try to speak to Scott in terms of that role of Jonathan Archer and such like that. What were your sort of memories for that? Was that early on? Was that from the offset?
No,
or was it
no. In fact, the irony is that the show was clearly on the cutting block, and when in season 3, Manny Coto came on, a wonderful writer, wrote for 24, has written a number of things that you'd be familiar with. When he was brought on, to a certain extent, he was brought on because the creators, Brandon and Rick, one, they wanted a new voice, but two, they had a certain odd kind of latitude because at this point we were playing with house money. It didn't seem as if it was likely the show was going to continue on. Manny was a huge fan of the original series. So he wanted to do a lot of kind of Valentine episodes to the original show. So he was the one who said, let's have the Mirror Universe, a callback to the original show. He was the one who said, let's have episodes where we explain why the Klingons look differently than they did in the original series. He had a deep affection. And I think in large part it was because of him that Brent Spiner came in. I would say that Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis, who came in our finale, that was not actually something that the fans really liked because they kind of felt that framing device was actually not serving our storyline. Lovely people, I adore them both. But I would tend to agree that I think in that instance, they maybe didn't do our show too much of a service in our finale.
And John, in terms of your character, Doctor Phlox, in terms of the makeup and the wardrobe for you, I remember your season regular, there long days, long sorts of shootings. Were you there in the morning, roughly at around 6 a.m. in the morning, in terms of putting on makeup and sort of costume and sort of getting ready? And what was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it would depend. One, I was number 7 on the call sheet, and there are 7 series regulars, so I had a little song I sang in those episodes when I didn't have too much to do. I would sing it to the other actors to irritate them as I was leaving the set after having done my one scene. I would sing, day off, 6 days off, and the checks still come. So it was hardly an exhausting job for me. In those episodes where they used me a lot, and there were some, I would have to be there around 4:30 in the morning. 2.5 hours of makeup and hair. And if it was a fairly early set call for the crew, 7:30, you gotta be pretty much kind of ready to go by the time they're starting the rehearsal. So that was as early. And then if it was a full day and maybe we would shoot until 6:30 or 7, and it took me an hour to get the makeup off, those were 14-hour days. I think on a sidebar note, one of the things our industry is really reckoning with, and it's going to be very difficult, is for the industry to recognize that those kinds of hours are simply not humane. And it's going to require some, and I don't know if it's going to happen, but some real wrenching changes in the way our business thinks about how it produces. Yeah. He's a Star Trek fan, I can tell. You're muted, Jim.
I'll edit that out, no problem. John, just going forward in terms of multiple episodes over the sort of 4 seasons as well. We mentioned some of the other cast there as well: Jolena Balek, Dominic Keating, Connor Trainer, Linda Park. In terms of, I've mentioned that sort of family sort of environment. Were you able to get involved in any other sort of projects throughout those sort of 4 seasons, or was it very much you were tied to the show for the duration from 2001 to 2000?
I was lucky because, I mean, bottom line, most television at some level is action adventure. It's about attractive people making love and having fistfights. When all is said and done, that's kind of one of the great standard tropes in all television. I'm a character guy. Nobody wants me on screen for that long. So I had a lot of downtime. So yes, I was able to cherry pick from other gigs. So I did some film, I did other television shows. I was on Stargate, I was on Angel. I did a movie called Out of Time. As the years progressed, they began to use me maybe a little bit more, so it was a little less possible for me to do that come seasons 3 and 4. And also it can get tiring, and I didn't want to push my luck with the producers. They were very generous to me, allowing me to do this. I was infinitely more ambitious when I was younger. Nowadays, the idea of actually, while you've got a job, going out to look for more work, it seems like, what was I thinking? I was a crazy person. But I was young or younger. I was full of piss and vinegar. Now it's like, I love this. I'm gonna sit at home, read my books on the day off.
And did Scott take an awful lot of it on his shoulders to make it a success? this Captain Jonathan Archer, did he feel the sort of the role that he had to Captain Janeway, the other?
I think here's the thing: if you're number one on the call sheet, if you're in television and you're number one on the call sheet, the show rests on your ability to show up and put in the work every day, and to really fight to maintain a terrific environment for the crew and for the cast. It's like the quarterback of a football team. Scott was a great quarterback. He remembered people's birthdays. He kept the set light. He knew when to make a joke. He knew when you had to kind of like ramp it up and kind of, let's stop the funny business. He was a lovely professional actor. He reminds me of Mark Harmon, who I also worked with on NCIS. Similarly, one of the guys who sets the tone. I've also been on shows where the number one is kind of difficult, doesn't show up on time, keeps camera late. It creates a lot of bad habits on the set and teaches other younger actors that they can get away with shit. Those sets are not fun to be on. I've been very lucky in that I've never been a series regular on a show with a lead that's been kind of a schmuck, but I've certainly guested on shows where the lead has been a schmuck, and I've always felt very bad for the crew. It makes the day longer and the work much more unpleasant. Scott's a gem.
Do you think that was a sort of ambitious, John, in a way, trying to set this before Captain Kirk, set this before William Shatner, and the whole pretense that year Star Trek?
I thought it was a great idea. My critique of the show probably had more to do with the fact that there are always a lot of cooks in television. I thought if they're going to make a show about the first ship, then they should kind of like, let it be messier. I think there should have been overlapping dialogue and argument. What do you mean? No, you can't. You're crazy. What do you? There should have been a lot more of the sense of anxiety and newness. And they started going in that direction. People didn't trust the transporter. The weapons didn't work. We've never bumped into this particular alien before. They moved in that direction, but I think the network notes and a general sense of what we thought the Star Trek fans would object to kind of kept leading us back to something safer. As an example, I use this example a lot, and maybe, I'm older, so my memory is a little, this may be somewhat apocryphal. My memory is there's an episode early on when somebody comes back from a planet, and in the transporter, we don't like the transporter, and their head is where their ass is supposed to be in the first draft. I always kind of got a sneak peek at the first draft through some insiders in the makeup chair. They're not usually supposed to show the actors that because they're afraid the actors are going to bitch and moan. You're not using me. So the first draft, it's like, oh my gosh, the guy's coming up from the planet. His head is where his ass is supposed to be. By the time the final draft comes out, it's like he comes back from the transporter and there's a twig sticking out of his ear. Oh, let's just cut that off. To me, that was illustrative of what I think was problematic about the show. It didn't take it far enough. But I liked the idea of being the first ship. I thought that was a smart one.
And John, in terms of your set, was there no expense spared in terms of your shooting sort of location and the loft that you were in? Was it a well-designed set? Yes.
Set was great. And I think the set did a lot to convey that sense of claustrophobia. And, it was like a submarine. It didn't have the same kind of a new age, airy, open feel that the Next Generation set had. I think that was a great design choice. Unfortunately, because our ratings weren't strong and CBS was essentially, I don't even know if we want to keep this. CBS owned UPN. I don't even know if we want to keep this show. They didn't have much else on UPN. The compromise was we're not going to give them a lot of money. So as the series progressed, I think the cap on our budget became a little more problematic. We started doing more and more what they call bottle shows. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. It means that you don't actually leave the confines of the soundstage. You're not shooting on location. So I think we didn't quite have the elbow room financially to pull off some of what might have made it more interesting visually.
So you almost felt like once you came to season 3 that the writing was on the wall very much, that if you got it.
Yeah. Our first show, our very first episode, I think we had 10, 11 million people. The very next show, the second episode, we had 3 million people. Okay. That kind of drop, I could be off on those numbers, but it was a precipitate drop between the premiere and the second episode. The critics seem to like the first episode, and I thought, having gone back now and watched all the pilot episodes for the various previous iterations of Star Trek, I thought it was not a bad pilot. But for whatever reason, and I think some of it was simply, again, a bit of Star Trek fatigue, I think people kind of watched the pilot and thought, yeah, and then they didn't follow it. And to a certain extent, our first season, I think, you know, those folks who did follow it, they too became somewhat disappointed in the predictability of some of the storylines. By the time, it was a miracle we got picked up for season 2. And I think if it had not been for the fact that UPN didn't really have anything else, we probably would not have lasted even 4 seasons. The good thing is, because we did survive for season 3 and 4, and we did have an infusion of, I think, new energy with Manny Cotto, and he did have a different kind of spirit about the show. I think we ended up with a show that has done better in retrospect. People that I meet and talk to like it more now than they liked it at the time. So I'm glad we got a chance to, you know, last long enough to make a better impression on folks.
And John, in terms of what we see now, we're beginning to see reincarnated versions of Star Trek again. We've Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Origins, and they're bringing those ties there back to, as we mentioned, Brent Spiner, back to Patrick sort of Stewart, trying to get that sort of connection as well. Is it very hard for anyone to come into that sort of Star Trek universe now and sort of go on their own in terms of creating a new vibe, a new element there? Because it almost feels that people are still drawn back to those charismatic figures of Shatner, of Patrick Stewart, when they think of the franchise.
I'm not a huge, in all candor, I'm not a huge Star Trek aficionado. I've really appreciated the people that I've gotten to meet down the years who are connected with the franchise. They've all been unfailingly lovely and gracious. I enjoy going to the conventions, and I've watched bits and pieces of all of the shows just so I kind of understand the universe. But I myself am not a huge fan. I'm not a huge fan of anything, really, to be honest with you. I like to read. So I'm not great at speaking to what does or doesn't work with the current iterations of Star Trek. It seems to me that Discovery is not attempting to necessarily, although I guess it does have kind of a Pike, Captain Pike, a callback part. But at least the first season struck me as a show that was attempting to kind of go off in its own direction. It's hard. The franchise exists in part because of a nostalgic appreciation for its own history. People become Star Trek fans in a way because their parents and their parents' parents were Star Trek fans. So it's kind of built into the franchise to celebrate its own history. We always talk about the Star Trek Bible and the timeline and yada, yada, yada. So it's intensely self-referential by definition. So I get the idea that they're always going to kind of want to see if they can kind of come up with these wonderful lollipops of here's Picard again, and Brent Spiner again, and yada, yada. Mind you, nobody is calling John Billingsley out of retirement. So obviously there's a limit to how much, the fans need. Where's Doctor Phlox? That call does not seem to be coming from the mountaintops on down.
And John, I suppose being on a network TV show, being a regular, as you mentioned, for the four season, was an experience and a journey that you would do all over again? Did it bring you into the public spotlight? Did it open up further opportunities for you?
Yes, and well, that's a hard question to answer because it's not that I don't want to use the word ghetto, but the reality is that any genre show has its base audience. There's not necessarily a transference between that audience and the larger general public. If you're on ER, you are on the entire public radar screen. We were on a specific slice of a radar screen. And that's true for the Hollywood community too. There were casting directors who, when I reemerged after 4 years, said, "Oh, I didn't know where you'd gone," because they weren't Star Trek fans. And it wasn't even like a hit Star Trek show. It was kind of a flop Star Trek show. So that show did not exactly help me professionally. After it was over, I didn't get a ton of work for 9 months to a year. I kind of had to reintroduce myself to the world. Okay. On the other hand, neither did it attach me to a character. I think it could be tricky, like Leonard Nimoy. I am not Spock. I didn't have to worry about that. I didn't have to tell anybody I'm not Dr. Phlox, because nobody knew I was Dr. Phlox in the first place.
John, of time is beginning to catch up on us now. And just before I let you go, is there any sort of story or memory from your time on set, a sort of a funny moment and maybe an interaction with characters or actors within sort of set that still makes you laugh or smile to this day? Or
I won the Halloween contest
okay.
by dressing up as Phlox in bondage. I was chained to a leash that was held by the focus puller, and she paraded me around the bridge. I had a red rubber ball in my mouth and a black leather bustier and the whole 9 yards, and she flagellated me in the captain's chair to great applause and acclaim. And then Paramount said, "There will be no more costume events." So I think I killed the tradition of the Star Trek Halloween party. That's a fond memory of mine. John, and a photo, by the way, that nobody else has ever seen.
John Billingsley, an absolute pleasure for sharing your memories with us today about your memories of Dr. Phlox in Star Trek Enterprise, which ran from 2001 to 2005, over 4 seasons, 97 episodes in total. I won't mention, I'll try it again, Danubian.
No, not quite. Here's how you remember. Where you know where you're from? Dunno. If you get the Dunno right, you're okay for the second half, which is Bulin.
Okay.
Now you try it.
Denoblian.
Denobulin.
Denobulin.
Denobulin. Nobody could. That's why, you see, no, that's why they don't bring me back. That's why they can't bring, they have this unpronounceable alien species. People can say Klingon, but nobody can say Denobulin. John, except me, which is why I got the job.
John, an absolute pleasure. I see behind you, you have a world of books there, so I'll let you get back to your reading for the rest of the night. And no doubt a few classics there to be read. John Billingsley, an absolute pleasure. Take care, mate.
My pleasure. You too. Take care.